No escape, no mercy. Abuse, bullying, and survival inside prison. Before we go any further, lock the doors, dim the lights, and hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a reality buried behind steel bars and concrete walls, where survival isn't guaranteed and mercy is a myth. The sirens were already echoing across the East River when the emergency call came in from Rikers Island. An inmate had been found unconscious inside a housing unit restroom. Blood pooled beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Surveillance cameras in the corridor outside had mysteriously gone dark for exactly 11 minutes. By the time paramedics pushed through the heavy gates, the man was barely breathing. His name was Daniel Reyes, 22 years old, awaiting trial, locked inside one of America's most notorious jail complexes. He wasn't serving a sentence yet. He hadn't even had his day in court. And now, he might not survive the night. Correction officers claimed they hadn't seen anything. Other inmates refused to speak. The silence was immediate and absolute, the kind that spreads fast when fear controls the room. Detective Mara Sullivan from the New York Special Investigations Unit arrived before sunrise. She had seen gang murders, organized crime hits, and corruption cases, but something about this scene felt different. There were bruises on Daniel's ribs, older ones, defensive wounds on his knuckles, and a crude warning scratched into the paint inside the stall door: "Stay quiet." This wasn't sudden violence. It was escalating torment. Across the Atlantic, reports from Inspectorate of Prisons had been documenting eerily similar patterns: rising assaults, intimidation networks, and vulnerable inmates left unprotected. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Australia, inquiries into the Dawndale Youth Detention Center exposed systemic abuse and failures that shocked the public. Different countries. Same pattern. Inside Daniel's housing unit, investigators uncovered whispers of a hierarchy: strong inmates controlling weaker ones, debts enforced with fists, and staff accused of looking the other way. Some officers had already been under internal review for misconduct, but nothing had stuck. No one talked. No one testified. Because talking meant consequences. When Detective Sullivan pulled surveillance backups from an external server, she found something the facility insisted didn't exist: partial footage from a maintenance camera overlooking the stairwell. It showed Daniel being cornered the night before by two masked inmates and a third figure standing at the far end of the hall. Not an inmate. A uniformed officer. And when the timestamp froze, just before the feed cut out, that officer didn't intervene. He stepped back. But when investigators enhanced the frame and zoomed in on the officer's badge number, they realized something that changed everything. The badge didn't belong to any officer currently assigned to Rikers Island. The badge number led to a name buried deep in archived personnel files: Officer Liam Mercer. Except Mercer had resigned from Rikers Island 8 months earlier after an internal misconduct complaint quietly disappeared. Officially, he left for personal reasons. Unofficially, several inmates had accused him of orchestrating housing unit discipline through trusted enforcers. Detective Mara Sullivan stared at the still frame again. The image was grainy, distorted by low light, but the posture was unmistakable. Mercer had a habit of leaning back on his heels, arms folded, chin slightly raised. It was a stance other officers had once joked about, until the joke stopped. If Mercer wasn't employed there anymore, why was someone wearing his badge? Or worse, why was his badge still inside the facility? Daniel Reyes remained in critical condition. Doctors confirmed internal bleeding consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. Not a spontaneous fight. A coordinated beating. Sullivan interviewed inmates from Daniel's housing unit one by one. Most claimed they had been asleep. A few muttered vague statements about debts. But one young detainee, barely 19, trembled as he spoke. "They call it protection," he whispered. "If you don't join, you pay. If you can't pay, they make an example." "Who's they?" Sullivan asked. The young man hesitated. "The ones who don't get searched." That detail hit harder than any accusation. In a controlled environment, contraband and weapons don't move without help. Oversight reports from Inspectorate of Prisons had documented similar patterns in the UK: staff shortages, blind spots in surveillance, and officers overwhelmed or complicit. In Australia, investigations tied to the Dale Youth Detention Centre exposed how authority, when unchecked, could mutate into intimidation. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Back in New York, Sullivan requested inventory logs for decommissioned equipment. 3 badges, including Mercer's, were listed as destroyed. But the destruction certificates were signed by a supervisor currently on medical leave. Then Daniel woke up. Barely conscious, voice fractured, he whispered only 3 words before slipping back under sedation. He runs the tier. Sullivan leaned closer. Who does? But Daniel's monitors spiked, and nurses forced her back. That night, another inmate from the same housing unit was found injured in a stairwell. Not critical, but deliberate. A message. The investigation was no longer quiet. Someone inside knew detectives were closing in. When Sullivan returned to the surveillance lab to re-examine the footage, she noticed something new, a reflection in the polished floor near the masked inmates. A 4th shadow. Not Mercer. Someone holding a radio. And when she cross-referenced shift assignments, she realized that the officer officially assigned to that corridor had clocked out an hour before the assault, which meant whoever stood there wasn't supposed to be on duty. And someone inside the jail was manipulating the records in real time. By the 3rd week of the investigation, Detective Mara Sullivan wasn't just chasing violent inmates. She was chasing ghosts inside the system. Digital forensics confirmed what she feared. Shift logs at Rikers Island had been altered after Daniel Reyes was attacked. Someone with administrative access had overridden timestamps, reassigned posts, and wiped internal messaging records. It wasn't random tampering. It was controlled. Daniel, still recovering, agreed to speak under protective supervision. His face was swollen, ribs wrapped, eyes hollow but focused. It's not just them, he said quietly. It's structured. He described a tier system inside the housing unit. Certain inmates were granted privileges, extra phone time, preferred bunks, early showers. In return, they enforced discipline. Vulnerable detainees, first-timers, mentally ill, those without gang ties, were pressured into protection agreements. Refusal meant isolation, harassment, staged fights. Mercer started it, Daniel whispered. But he didn't end it. Sullivan pressed him. Who runs it now? Daniel hesitated, then gave a name. Captain Adrian Cole, a senior supervisor with 2 decades of service and a reputation for restoring order in chaotic units. Cole had publicly criticized oversight reports and dismissed comparisons to findings by Inspectorate of Prisons, calling them foreign exaggerations. He had also defended the facility during national scrutiny tied to conditions at Dale Youth Detention Center, arguing that isolated incidents were being politicized. Cole believed in control. Sullivan obtained financial records through a court order. Small deposits, $200 here, $350 there, had been routed into accounts linked to relatives of 2 known inmate enforcers. The payments coincided with spikes in reported assaults. Then another witness surfaced. A corrections officer nearing retirement requested a confidential meeting. He described a culture of intimidation among staff. Officers who questioned housing decisions were reassigned to undesirable shifts. Complaints vanished. Promotions favored loyalty. There are cameras everywhere, the officer said. Except where they don't want them. He handed Sullivan a flash drive. Inside were archived maintenance maps showing blind spots in surveillance coverage, areas intentionally left unmonitored after renovations. One of those blind spots aligned perfectly with the restroom where Daniel had been found. But the most disturbing file wasn't architectural. It was a recent internal memo from Captain Cole instructing staff to minimize documentation of inmate conflicts to reduce external scrutiny. Reduce documentation, not reduce violence. As Sullivan prepared to request arrest warrants, an emergency call interrupted her briefing. Daniel Reyes was missing from the medical unit. No forced exit. No sign of struggle. Just an empty bed. And security footage from that wing had gone dark for exactly 11 minutes, again. The lockdown order was issued within seconds of Daniel Reyes being declared missing. Gates slammed shut across Rikers Island. Housing units froze mid-movement. Radios crackled with overlapping commands. 11 minutes. The same blackout window as the night Daniel was nearly beaten to death. Detective Mara Sullivan ran straight to the surveillance control room. Technicians insisted it was a temporary power fluctuation, but backup generators had activated instantly. Only one wing had gone dark, the medical corridor. "Pull external feeds," Sullivan ordered. A traffic camera positioned near the service entrance showed a transport van idling during the blackout. Not an official corrections vehicle. No markings. When the timestamp resumed inside the facility, the van was gone. Captain Adrian Cole appeared moments later, calm, almost rehearsed. "We're reviewing every possibility," he said, hands clasped behind his back. "Inmates manipulate situations. Reyes may have staged this." Sullivan didn't blink. From a locked medical unit? Cole's jaw tightened. An hour later, state police intercepted the unmarked van less than 20 miles from the jail. Daniel was inside, alive, sedated, wrists zip-tied. The driver wasn't an inmate. It was Officer Liam Mercer, very much employed. Payroll records had been quietly reactivated 2 weeks earlier under a temporary contract classification, authorized by Captain Cole. Under interrogation, Mercer folded faster than anyone expected. He described a system built on fear and silence. Inmates who cooperated maintained control of housing units. Violence kept others compliant. Reports were minimized to avoid federal intervention. Transfers were used to silence potential whistleblowers. Daniel's removal had been planned. "He was talking," Mercer admitted. Cole said if oversight digs deeper, the whole structure collapses. Financial trails, altered logs, destroyed badge records, it all converged. Captain Cole was arrested on charges including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and facilitating assault. Several officers were suspended pending investigation. But the final twist came weeks later. During a public hearing reviewing institutional failures, echoing concerns long raised by bodies like HM Inspectorate of Prisons and inquiries into facilities such as Don Dale Youth Detention Center, Daniel testified remotely.
His voice was steady.
What shocked the room wasn't just the abuse. It was his final statement.
"There are more," he said.
"Different names. Different units. Same system." Independent auditors later confirmed patterns in multiple facilities across state lines, unreported assaults, manipulated data, vulnerable inmates left exposed. Captain Cole hadn't invented the machine. He had inherited it. Mercer hadn't built the silence. He had enforced it. And Daniel Reyes survived not because the system worked, but because this time, someone refused to look away. The investigation didn't end with arrests. It expanded. Because when the lights go out for 11 minutes inside a prison, it's never just a power failure. It's a warning. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one, hit subscribe so you don't miss it.